My game of the day from round 5 of the Sunway Sitges International Chess Festival is SP Sethuraman against SL Narayanan, two of the Indian cohort here in Sitges. In fact, there are 85 Indian players playing in the tournament, and there's over 300 players playing in the tournament, but 85 from India, and so many strong players. Well, both these players were on 4 out of 4 going into this round. And, well, we could expect a good battle. So, SP Sethuraman, rated 2638. SL Narayanan, rated 2626. And he's on a rich streak of form at the moment. Now, this is interesting, with Sethuraman playing knight c3. So this is a tricky move order. Basically, you might play a closed variation of the Sicilian. You might go g3 or f4, or you keep your option open to play knight e2 or knight f3 and play d4. So that's why, basically I think the best move here, at least if white is going to play a closed variation, is knight c6. But then black has to contend with the fact that white might play knight e2 and d4, or knight f3 and d4, and go into an open Sicilian, and maybe you don't want to play with knight c6. So move order is really tricky here. Now I have no doubt that Narayanan played d6 because he's ready to go into a Najdorf if white goes back and plays either knight e2 or knight f3 here. But it allows white some interesting options. f4 is tricky actually, with I think a favourable Grand Prix attack. But d4 is a very trendy line at the moment. And it looks extremely odd to play the queen out at such an early stage, but white has a very different idea in mind to normal. So the queen drops back to d2, and now the bishop, well, is about to go to b2. Very unusual indeed. In fact, Magnus Carlsen used this in 2018 to defeat Radoslav Wojtaszek, and since then quite a few of the top players have experimented with this line, simply because it's a way of reaching an interesting position and, a sharp position, but you get away from normal theory. But of course, in the last couple of years, theory has developed. Quite a few games have been played. Bishop h6, attacking the queen, so f4. But of course now there are potential problems on this diagonal. You can see already there's a pin there. And I have to say that feels to me as though black is already all right here, with that pawn on e5 shutting out the bishop and pressure on f4, but it's still really tricky. Black castled and white castled, and Narayanan said after the game that he'd actually prepared this in some depth. He'd actually had this in I think he said a blitz game. So previously we've seen black exchanging on f4 and playing knight h5 to put pressure here. But rook e8 was Narayanan's move today, and he played this instantly. So it was clear that he was still in his preparation. And king b1 looks like a very sensible move to bring the king away from that diagonal. Knight d4. Well, it blocks the d file, of course. So queen takes d6 no longer possible. Of course, that pawn was en prise on f4 anyway. But knight d4 is a bit irritating for white. Closes the diagonal here with the bishop, and makes development, slightly problematic, which we can see after bishop g4. And now white has a choice. I thought during the game that white should be playing with rook f1, supporting this pawn and then driving the bishop away with h3 and g4. And Narayanan said after the game he would probably play rook c8 or something like that, but actually d5 is quite a nice break. And well, it's of course very complicated, but the basic idea is this, that the bishop goes back. When white takes, well, you can recapture on d5, but actually bishop f5 is a sneaky move. Attacking the pawn on c2, and black has quite a nice initiative there. Rook e1 played instead. And now, again, a move played so quickly by Narayanan. a5. He said, well, it seems logical that white is behind in development and pieces on the king's side. Why not attack on the queen's side? Well, maybe. I still find the move slightly surprising, actually. But of course, if the a-file opens, then black will have some attack. And knight f3, it's about time white developed. Now knight b5 again, I found this a very surprising move during the game. I really hadn't anticipated this at all. Narayan thought this was very logical. Well, maybe with hindsight it is, because black wants to exchange off this knight. And that means that the e4 pawn is a bit weaker. And of course, having exchanged off that knight, then white's king position is a little bit weaker. But it certainly is an unusual manoeuvre, this, in the Sicilian knight c6 to d4 out to b5 again. And here I don't like Sethuraman's next move, queen d3. I think you should just take. I don't think this is bad for white, actually. I think it's just a very unclear position. So maybe h4, potentially h5, or maybe the knight goes to g5. So here, for example, that protects the e-pawn. I just think it's a very unclear position, actually. So anyway, knight b5 played, queen d3. So black exchanged. And then played queen c7. And I think after this move, it's probably clear that white has wasted some time, because you don't really want your bishop to sit on c3 in the line of black's queen. And black's queen doing a good job there, connecting the rooks, but also protecting the d pawn and protecting the e pawn as well. And, well, I would say the kind of logical move here for white would be to just step back with the bishop. And I think the bishop ought to be protecting the king. But there is a problem with this move, and that is knight h5. And that knight succeeds in attacking these very sensitive spots. So already a difficult position for white. Bishop d2, well, you can see that white's king is lacking protection. True, this pawn is protected, but still, let's see what happens. In fact, Narayanan simply played bishop g7, putting the bishop on that diagonal once white's bishop has left the scene, and why not? And here, well, with hindsight, perhaps white should exchange these pawns. That at least closes this long diagonal, so this bishop has no effect. Then maybe g4, but a4, well, it's clear that black has a dangerous initiative against white's king, whereas, well, what is white doing on the king's side? These pieces are very badly placed. Nevertheless, g4 was certainly a mistake. Let's see what happened, because it got really dramatic at this point. Black exchanged on f4. And then knight takes e4, sacrificing a piece. So Sethuraman took this. And now queen c3, threatening, of course, 2 checkmates on the move, b2 or a1. Therefore, king c1 is forced. And now bishop b5 played to prevent white's queen coming back to d3, because if we play rook e8, then the queen comes back here. But, I mean, what does black have for the piece here? Well, white's king is, of course, in desperate trouble. It can be driven out. Let's just get the paint off the board. It can be driven out with a check, but actually, for the moment, the king will live. So, first of all, well, rook c8 is actually already a good move here. That would prevent white from playing queen d3. And the game continuation, bishop b5, also achieves the same thing, preventing queen d3. And now rook e8 is a pretty serious threat, because the rook is going to come down here somewhere. And it's going to be mate, basically. And now Sethuraman chose to take on b7. Maybe queen e3 is the critical test of this piece sacrifice. In fact, black should just be winning this position. So let's just see a plausible line. So check, king d1. Now be careful, because it's possible to interpose if there's a check on the back rank. Rook c8 threatens the pawn here. Somehow it shouldn't be surprising that black is winning this position, because look at white's pieces bunched on the other side of the board, whereas black's pieces are all trained on white's king. It's got to be winning, and it is, of course. So a check, have to interpose, and that means we're keeping hold of this. But now a killer move, bishop d3. And if that's taken, then of course that can be taken there. And after this, well, this is a nice combination actually. Very simple stuff. We take, and then just bishop h6. And there is no decent defense to queen takes bishop, followed by taking this one. So for example here, well, this saves one of the pieces. But black takes so many pawns. At the moment it's 4 pawns for a piece, and basically white can't free himself here. It's completely winning for black. But in the game, queen takes b7 played. So that attacks the rook and the bishop. But actually black deals with this very simply. Rook c8 threatens mate on c2. White defends with knight e1. And now rook e8. It's a really nice way to gain time to bring the rook to the e-file, because now if queen takes bishop, in fact this is checkmate, like so. And otherwise, well, if the knight moves again, we've got rook e2, for example, and it's going to be checkmate in short order. So bishop e4 blocks. A check. Another check. The king staggers up the board. And now a very clean finish. You can check here with the queen, but actually queen d1. That's the kind of move I like. Very clean. We don't need to chase the king again. But what we're doing is threatening 2 mates in one. Bishop d4 check. Or queen e2. And there isn't really a satisfactory defense. Knight d3 holds for a moment, but queen takes rook. And that was the final move of the game. Black is the exchange up with a continuing attack, and white is utterly lost. I really enjoyed that. An absolute crush. It's an unusual variation of the Sicilian, this queen takes d4, and I don't quite believe it. It does waste a lot of time. And I think Narayanan proved that white was actually quite a long way behind in development and succeeded in producing a very nice attack with a piece sacrifice. Thanks very much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe, and do support the channel. Check out the links to PayPal and also patreon.com PowerPlayChess. You'll find those links down there. And check out the rewards on Patreon, for example. Bonus videos, newsletter. We'd be grateful for your support. Thanks for watching.